Hello, my friend, and welcome to the study. It's very early morning here on this early autumn day. I've left the window open so we can hear some birds and the fountain outside, some garden sounds, and hopefully not too many other machine sounds. Today, I'd like to share some Suetonius with you. We'll look at the Latin of part of his Lives of the 12 Caesars from chapter 22 of Gaius Caligula. We'll write it out with some amethyst ink from this inkwell with a wooden pen, so we'll have a steel nib and some pen scratching sounds. Then we'll have a look at a couple of translations, including mine, and while I'm writing the Latin, we can talk a little bit about this chapter from the life of Caligula. This one starts here. Actinus, quasi de principe, reliqua ut de monstro naranda sunt. So much for Caligula as emperor. We must now tell of his career as a monster. So to write out Suetonius' monster of Caligula, we'll get our nice smooth paper and amber ink. And have some early morning writing. Just you and me in the study with the sounds of the garden. Pluribus cognomibus ad sumptis. After he had assumed various surnames. Nam et pius et castrorum filius, pious and son or child of the camp. Pater exercitum, father of the army, or all the armies, exercitum, et Optimus Maximus Caesar, the greatest and best, or best and greatest of all Caesars. And there's our passive. He was called. And there's our subjunctive with a cum clause. Cum auderet. Forte reges. Qui officii causa in urbem ad venerant. Apud se super cenam de nobilitate generis. Exclamavit, chancing to overhear some kings, when he might have heard some kings who had come to Rome, and causa, there's our purpose clause, to pay their respects to him, disputing at dinner about the nobility of their descent, he cried or exclaimed. No less in the Greek tongue. Ace. Koiranos. I've missed a letter there. So my Greek is not perfect. And we've got to and another ace as well that I've skipped out, and ba. Right, ace. means in our own English subjunctive, let there be one Lord and King. These words carrying some great significance. And as he said them in Greek, very philosophizing, was he making a statement about his government and his knowledge, or was Suetonius making a statement about his? Nec multum affuit, and there's our favorite quin statim. Diadema. Sumerit. Speciemque. Principatus in regni. Formam. Converteret. And he came near assuming a crown at once, and changing the semblance of a principate into the form of a monarchy, or we might say, changing the government from imperial to regal. Verum admonitus et principum et regum se excessisse. Fastigium. So, but being told they had far exceeded the grandeur of kings and princes, at that point someone dared to say something like that to Caligula. What happened next? Divinam ex eo majestatem asserere sibi coepit. He began to arrogate himself to a divine majesty. Or, shall we say, he began from that time on to lay claim to divine majesty. That we can move the book up and still keep it open to copy the Latin. There we go. datoque negotio ut simulacra nominum religione et arte praeclara inter quae Olympii Iovis apportarentur there's a jackdaw outside joining us, Graecia quibus capite redempto suum imponeret partem palati ad forum long sentence usque promoit atque aede bit of ink there castoris et polucis in vestibulum you can see that Suetonius knows his Iliad. Transfigurata. And we're not done yet with this sentence. Consistens. And there's our participle, if you're following the grammar. And we've got some pigeons joining us as well, as all the birds wake up. Saipe. Inter, what are we? There's a long sentence here, and it's a very good one too. Saipe inter fratres. Fratres, meaning brother, but so many other meanings as in English today. Fratres Deus. Look at that. Fratres Deus medium adorandum say adentibus Ad a untibus. Ex hibebat. I think we're running out of space. We're still going with Suetonius' sentence. Let's see how we've got so far. So, verum ad montis. After he was told that he exceeded, or far exceeded, the grandeur of kings and princes, he began to arrogate himself in divine majesty, and he ordered all the images of the gods, which were famous either for their beauty or the veneration paid them. We have Inter Olympi Jovis ad paretor. So, among which was that of Jupiter of Olympus, ordered them to be brought from Greece Graecia, that he might take the hands off and put on his own. So the Romans and the Greeks before them, and indeed those kingdoms and empires of Asia Minor, believed that the statuary and likenesses actually contained the spirit of the god or ancestor whom they were depicting. So it's not so much an affront to the artist as to the god himself and people's perception of him. He ordered these to be brought from Greece that he might take the hands off and put on his own. Having continued part of the Palatium as far as the Forum, his big remodeling project of the gods, and the temple of Castor and Pollux being converted into a kind of a vestibule to his house, to Caligula's house. He often stationed himself between the twin brothers, Castor and Pollux, and so presented himself to be worshipped by all votaries. And let's go on, see how far we can get on this page. Et quidam eum latiarem Ioem consalutarunt. And that's our sentence there that's covered up most of our page. And some of whom saluted him, quidam eum latiarum, saluted him by the name of Jupiter Latialis. I'm going to close up the ink now. Do you like that lid sound? Opening our ink bottle very early in the morning. Let's see how we did with the translation. So, not too bad. And making the temple of Castor and Pollux its vestibule, he often took his place between the divine brothers and exhibited himself there to be worshipped by those who presented themselves and some hailed him as Jupiter Latiaris. He also set up a special temple to his own godhead, with priests and with victims of the choicest kind. In this temple was a life-sized statue of the emperor in gold, which was dressed each day in clothing such as he wore himself. The richest citizens used all their influence to secure the priesthoods of his cult and bid high for the honor. The victims were flamingos, peacocks, black grouse, guinea hens, and pheasants, offered day by day, each after its own kind. At night he used constantly to invite the full and radiant moon to his embraces and his bed, while in the daytime he would talk confidentially with Jupiter Capitolinus, now whispering, and then in turn putting his ear to the mouth of the god, now in louder and even angry language, for he was heard to make the threat, "Lift me up, or I'll lift you." And here we have another Greek by Suetonius, again quoting the Iliad. And we had before that same image of lifting up from Cicero's unfettered tongue, as it were. I didn't want to give that image because of what happened to his head, his disembodied head later, but it is ancient Rome, so be that as it may. For Caligula was heard to make that threat, "Lift me up, or I'll lift you up," meaning into the heavens, meaning I will destroy you, but finally won by entreaties, as he reported, and even invited to live with the god. He built a bridge over the temple of the deified Augustus, and thus joined the palace to the capital. Presently, to be nearer yet, he laid the foundations of a new house in the court of the capital. So we can see the arrogance of Caligula here. The assuming nature of someone so full of himself. Let's have a look at what Suetonius could mean. Although we're out of paper because I've only written one page, so I can copy out a bit while we talk a little about this passage of how Caligula became a monster. As we see with this language, Suetonius uses a deceptively simple style, which might lead us to think that he's attempting a job as a historian. But it has been said he does not have the depth or height of vision of his contemporary Tacitus. Indeed, the public once judged him very harshly on his Vitae, calling him a kind of a bookworm who was compiling gossip about the private life of the world's great men. However, in the end, Suetonius is neither an artist, poet, or historian. He is, however, one of history's great authors, an inexhaustible source on Roman cultural life, and distinguished in the genre of Vita, if not Historia. There's much in the language and organization of what Suetonius writes, and in our passage we can see that it resonates with several paragraphs from the life of Augustus, the behavior of whom, with regard to religion, is evoked clearly in earlier chapters and later chapters. He himself brought large sums of money to the temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline, increased the number of priests as well. But dealing with the modernization of the princeps, that is where this passage has the most connection. Augustus does not accept that no temple be bestowed upon him, and he melts down all the statues of silver that had been erected to him. Here we measure the gap of the behavior of Caligula with that of Augustus, Caligula appearing here as a very incarnation of excess. And similar parallels we can see with Tiberius, an emperor with more contrasting image, and whose debauchery on the island of Capri is uncompromisingly revealed to us in Suetonius' Vita. The beginning of the reign of the successor of Augustus was marked by false modesty, and perhaps no modesty and moderation, since he refused to have temples, Flaminis, priests, dedicated to him. Now, it seems that the attitude, by the time Caligula ascends, of moderation with regard to the gods finds its counterpart in respect for political institutions. Of course, Suetonius tells us in chapter 30 that Tiberius only gave the illusion of freedom. Nevertheless, Tiberius, like Augustus, leave the Senate and the magistrates their traditional power. We can then deduce from this that this chapter 22 should not be read only as the almost comic delusions of a megalomaniac emperor, but it also deserves to be taken into account as a political reflection on the exercise of power and the different types of government. Caligula here seems to be orchestrating a form of revolution in the status of the princeps, since he metamorphoses the Roman political regime. The unheard of nature of this sovereign legitimizes a different writing and consequently a new heading. Until now, in fact, it had been a question of a prince and Suetonius therefore took up the usual species: origin of education, family, accession to power, popularity. Then it becomes a question of a separate creature or different animal altogether. Suetonius will now be forced to speak of Caligula as a monstrum, and therefore to invent some chapters. Caligula's excessiveness manifests itself first by the nicknames, wanting to be better, and better than the next guy, and by the desire to be considered the king of kings, the first of all kings. This first stage of a dizzying escalation. These nicknames represent, by their gradation and their number, the megalomania of the sovereign, whereas Augustus, after quite some hesitation, only chose one nickname, Augustus, from Octavian, putting aside the title of Romulus, which was too reminiscent of the ancient royalty of Rome. We also notice here the almost comic gap between the nicknames that the prince gives himself and the actions mentioned in the Vita. The last nickname, the longest, naturally marks its superlative excess, since Optimus Maximus is the traditional name of Jupiter Capitoline. This also implicitly shows the guilty attitude of Caligula's entourage, an entourage that seems to bend to the princeps' whims by calling him such names as he pleases. The passive vocabatur, as he was called, shows that he does not receive any additional agent, was called by someone, specifying the responsibility of one or the other. But the whole of the passage, in a diffuse way, shows a form of complacency on the part of those close to the emperor. Suetonius apparently refuses to play a similar role, since his work as a biographer generally consists of demystifying imperial majesty and showing the man and his failings behind this magnificence of power. The connector we have verum, or truly, certainly, begins the sentence where we cross to a new degree in the excess of this sovereign. And the perfect infinitive excerdice, to have retired out of, materializes this ascending dimension. Caligula renounces his mortal status and exceeds the highest degree of human greatness, a trajectory which is not without evoking the myth of Phaeton, the son of the sun, who borrowed his father's chariot without knowing how to drive it, and whom Zeus had to strike down to avoid the general conflagration of the world. Indeed, there is so much here in this one passage alone that we would need days to study it to its fullest extent. But we can see the very organization of the species and of the Suetonian sentence makes it possible to construct Caligula as the very figure of the Oriental tyrant, characterized by his excess and impiety. The omens of Caligula's death are, moreover, very clear, and confirm it that the statue of Jupiter that he wanted to transport to Rome let out a tremendous burst of laughter, and the day before Caligula's death, he saw in a dream this same god who, with his toe, precipitated him to the earth. Impietas is traditionally punished by the gods, and the punishment serves to remind man of the importance of moderatio. He who had imagined the most refined sacrifices for his own worship will have his throat cut like an expiatory victim. Thus will be restored the pax deorum distributed by the appearance of the monstrum. Thank you, my friend, for sharing this beautiful early autumn morning with me here in the study to talk about Suetonius, chapter in the life of Caligula, the emperor, the monster. I wish you a very beautiful day, with no monsters except Pokemon. Be good to yourself, my friend. Be kind to others. And, as always, be extraordinary.